When I was 12 years old, I suffered a great deal of insomnia. One night, I was bored and scrolling through the channels, and I stumbled upon a Christian movie that I didn't even realize was Christian at first. This movie really stuck with me. Like all Christian propaganda films, it's not great. But it's also kinda great, so don your robes and grab some popcorn and let's talk about it. The year is 1890. Our protagonist, Professor Russell Carlyle, is trying to get the school he works for to endorse a book he's written, but there's a problem. Fellow Professor Norris Anderson, played by Gavin McLeod, won't endorse. It turns out Professor Anderson has a very special reason for refusing to endorse. Specifically, he has seen the future and is worried that Carlyle's book proposes a Christian ethics without the grounding of the faith in Christ. Carlyle, understandably, refuses to believe it. He wrestles with Anderson's proposal that he visit the future himself, only showing up at the last minute, venturing to the futuristic world of the late 1990s. What ensues is a fish-out-of-water scenario that is quite bizarre. It definitely makes sense for a man from 1890 to be confused by the modern world, but there's a problem. He's confused by a lot of things that already existed in 1890. Pawn shops, for example, have existed for thousands of years. He goes to one in order to sell some coins and make some money.
So, where did you get these old coins?
A colleague gave them to me.
The pawn shop, in all likelihood, ripped him off. But he doesn't seem to notice. He decides that the money is sufficient and thanks the man, blessing him to the man's considerable confusion. In other scenes, we see him being confused by such things as soda and hot dogs, things that also existed in his own time.
Yes, I believe I'd like to try a hot dog.
What do you want on it?
Sorry?
Want everything on it?
Is this customary?
What's that?
This will be fine, thank you.
How about a soda?
Soda?
I like to think this is because rather than being confused by the future, he doesn't get out much in his own time either. He strikes up a friendship with a laundromat owner named Eddie Martinez. Eddie is a cool dude. This is one of the highlights of the movie because Eddie seems like a nice guy.
Is it Edward?
Huh? Oh, no. It's just Eddie, just like it sounds. Eddie, Ready Eddie, you know.
He's perplexed by this random Amish-looking man that doesn't understand the modern world, but he's nice anyway. Another cute little running gag that doesn't make a lot of sense is that Professor Carlyle keeps asking for tea, and people are confused.
Something to drink.
Tea?
Tea?
Something to drink?
Tea?
Tea!
This made me confused because this movie is 23 years old, but tea seems pretty popular. People like tea. My dad is a random hayseed from the middle of nowhere, and he's been a tea drinker since the 1960s. You can get tea almost anywhere, but somehow our good professor shifted to a future where nobody drinks tea anymore and all the businesses just have it anyway. But we must move on because the professor's interactions with the modern world escalate from wonderment to horror at the lack of Jesus in daily life. He meets a woman named Michelle, a good Christian that Professor Anderson told him to find. She introduces him to a church, and while the message is on point, Professor Carlyle is bothered because nobody seems to care. They're just going through the motions.
By my observation, there seemed to be boredom with the whole service. With praise hymns, hearing of God's word, everything.
He joins a church group on one of their outings to the movies, and this truly incredible scene happens.
You must stop this movie! The man on the screen just blasphemed the name of the Lord! There must be some mistake! You must stop this movie! This is an abomination!
After that, he stops into a clothing store to try on some new threads and sees, I suppose, a skimpy dress. I don't know because they never show it. He complains, saying that they shouldn't be selling things like that, and the man is confused, saying,
But to be honest, this is the first complaint we've had like this. Our customers, most of them don't seem to mind this sort of thing.
What really strikes me about these scenes is that nobody is forcing him to do anything. The movies have ratings. You can read on the posters who they're for and what kind of content they include. He made that choice, and when he doesn't like it, he demands they shut it down. Same for the dresses. He didn't have to go in, and he didn't have to look. These are choices that he made. You can chalk this up to simple shock and in-the-moment reactions, especially because I doubt the people behind this movie avoid the movies or dress like Little House on the Prairie, but I struggled to figure out what exactly they're even trying to say. The obvious takeaway is these things shouldn't be allowed, but they don't really make that case. The only case they've made is that people should be shocked, but they aren't, and that's a scandal in itself. This film has a big thing against science, which is the one area where it completely falls flat. It's kind of fun to see this weird Puritan react to the modern world with a sense of awe and terror, even when he's moralizing over it. What's not so fun is when he goes into a classroom and gives a rant that wouldn't even work in his own time.
The best part about Mr. Anderson's work is how he relates everything to the Bible. Remember, students, if any scientific record contradicts the scriptures, it is a scientific finding that is an error. The scriptures are never wrong.
Again, this man comes from 1890, not 1790. On the Origin of Species was published in 1859 and had come to widespread acceptance by the late 1800s. He has a whole rant about science always being biblical and the Bible always being right, which wasn't even true in his own time. What did the Bible have to say about electricity, which was already coming into wide use then? He says the Bible is always ahead of the times, but I don't remember Moses musing about the Higgs boson. His being ushered out of the room immediately after the Jesus talk and being told he can't mention religion in school like that is something he perceives as especially peculiar. He declares that he wasn't talking about religion, but he absolutely was. That was a sermon. He returns to church and gives a heartfelt sermon about the state the world is in. One of the highlights of this part is that even though he's giving a sermon you could hear in almost any church today, he does it with an earnestness that softens the potential blow, even recognizing his own imperfection. That's a big strength of Professor Carlyle throughout the movie. He's earnest, he's genuine, he does seem to legitimately care about people. He's usually not just spreading a message, even when he is spreading a message. Our good professor returns to his hotel room and checks out what is clearly intended to be the pay-per-view channels. Oh boy.
You are under arrest.
I'd better call Saul.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do.
But the time is short for Professor Carlyle. He has to return to his own time soon enough. Before he does that, he has one important stop to make. The laundromat. He has a touching conversation with Eddie where he hands Eddie a Bible and asks him to read it. Eddie assures the professor he will.
Yeah, I'll read it.
May I have your word, Eddie?
If Eddie Martinez tells you he's going to do something, he's going to do something. Now, I'm going to read this.
The professor is about to leave, but tells Eddie about the rapture and how much the professor wants him to go to heaven. Yes, he's proselytizing, but it's another scene where the professor comes off as incredibly earnest. It's a scene that, despite my obvious theological disagreement, is so sincere, it's hard to not appreciate. Finally, the professor returns to his own time. Professor Anderson attempts to send the Bible to different decades, beginning with 2100 and ending on the 2050s, implying that the rapture has to be some time before 2050. Tick-tock, my dudes. And really, I like this ending. When Jesus hasn't come by 2050, this scene will seem pretty silly, but I really do like it for what it is. So that's Time Changer, and I have some additional thoughts about it before I let you go. First, the charm of the whole project is pretty inescapable. The earnestness of Professor Carlyle is a gem in a field where the protagonists are often completely insufferable. Carlyle isn't pushing the faith in a God's not dead kind of way. He cares about people. That's his agenda. That's kind of admirable. Secondly, I am kind of astonished by how the narrative often works against itself with some important caveats. The whole thesis, as laid out at the beginning, is that Christian ethics without Christ leads to darkness. This is played out very literally in the scenes of Carlyle discovering the darker sides of the modern world, and yet he is a character removed from his own time. He chides some young women for planning to get drunk because alcohol is bad. The prohibitionists were on the rise in the 1890s, but alcohol use was still widespread at that time. It wouldn't have been a new and shocking thing for him that people drank, but for the fact that it was young women planning to imbibe. His world of 1890 bears no resemblance to our modern world, but the reality is more complicated. We descend from that world. We are inexorably linked. Whatever tendencies he sees in our world are merely recurrences of those in his. Lastly, the film does something very unusual for this genre by introducing nuance. Let us once more refer to God's Not Dead, where every atheist is a caricature. They are angry, mean people who must be converted at all costs. I can't really say anyone in this film is an atheist per se, but there are non-believers like Eddie, and they're just people, recognized as being as capable of good as the next person. Carlyle ends up agreeing with Anderson that Christian ethics alone isn't enough, but the justifications for this are woefully sparse. The antagonists are cops. Bold move for a Christian film, I must admit, but the thing is, they're not even really bad guys. They're suspicious of Carlyle because he's kind of suspicious. His backstory is clearly, from their perspective, nonsense. He has no reason to be there. He acts weird. He seems like he's up to something. He's not, but he seems like he is, and near the climax, they try to take him in for questioning. That's actually pretty reasonable. It also leads to this scene.
I think we just missed the rapture.
Taken as a whole, all of these elements make for a very interesting film. It's earnest and sincere, but in a qualified way. There are messages it desperately wants to promote, but it doesn't really do that. It paints the modern world as flawed in a way the world of 1890 wasn't, while also not properly understanding the world of 1890. It comes off as pretty naive and therefore pretty benign. There had to be Christian messages. It's a Christian movie. That's what they do. But those messages just don't make sense. There's some really big stretching happening here. Overall, if I were to rate this movie, I would give it 2.5 stars out of 5. It's enjoyable for what it is if you turn off your brain and just go with it. It's a nice little fish out of water thing with some touching and humanizing moments, but unfortunately that couldn't save it from relative obscurity. I haven't met a single Christian that has seen this movie, even though it is available for free on YouTube and has a whopping 3.4 million views as of this video. But let's get down to brass tacks. Would I suggest you watch this movie? Well, not really. Not unless you like these kinds of movies for whatever reason. There are worse ways to waste an hour and a half, but that doesn't really mean you have to. I think some added context here is that this movie came out not long after 9/11, so at the time I saw it, my family was obsessed with the idea of the rapture. They believed Jesus was going to come back at any moment, and the ending kind of like struck a good chord there, but even with that, they don't remember it. I'm sure they all saw it. I'm pretty sure I showed them that movie, but they didn't care. So I am the only one who remembers it, presumably, other than the people who worked on it, and I hope that now, since we have checked it out together, you too will remember this movie, and it will occasionally resurface in your memories like, why do I remember that? Do I need to remember that? The answer is no, you don't. And also, I used this video as kind of an experiment because I bought a prompter because it takes me way too long to actually record the dialogue for my videos, and you probably noticed that I was reading it during the video parts where I am talking. I assume that I can fix that and not do that, not look around so much while recording, but we'll see. It's just an experiment. Let's hope it works out because I like scripting things. I think that's cool. I think it's pretty neat to read from a script instead of just trying to make stuff up and flailing all over the place and having to record something literally 700 times, which has happened before. So thanks for coming. Thanks for being here, and I hope you have a great one, especially if you remember Time Changer, because we are a rare breed indeed.
But the Lord hates divorce.
Hey, don't be dumping no guilt trip on me, all right? 1 out of 2 marriages get divorced these days. It's not like I'm the only one. Besides, it was her fault. She was driving me crazy.
1 out of 2 marriages ends in divorce. This is 50%.